He said he could bring back the dead, but she was the one who'd stopped believing. A grieving widow, a strange orphan, and a promise no sane soul should trust. But out in the dust, some things don't stay buried. Not grief, not guilt, and maybe not him. The boy was standing in the wheat. He couldn't have been more than 11, maybe 12. His coat was 2 sizes too big, his boots laced with string instead of leather, and a wide-brimmed hat drooped low over his eyes. But his hands were steady as they held the note. His voice didn't shake as he read it. To the widow Grace Caro, your husband may still be reached, but time is short. I can bring him back. Grace had her rifle raised before he even finished the last word. Back away from this house, she said, voice like flint. You're not the first to come around saying something like that, but you'll be the last. The boy didn't flinch, just stood there barefoot in the field, the heads of grain brushing his waist. Wind tugged at the paper in his hand, curling the corners like fire waiting to take it. Grace's thumb tightened on the hammer of the rifle. I mean it, she said again, louder this time. The boy looked up. I ain't lying, ma'am. She'd heard that too many times. Seen snake oil peddlers with velvet tongues and empty eyes, preachers with crosses in one hand and their other palm stretched for coin, men claiming visions, dreams, messages from beyond. All of them circling like vultures, the moment word got out that Emmett Caro was dead and the widow wouldn't sell the land. And now this, a boy. Grace stepped off the porch. You got 5 seconds, she said. I can bring him back, he repeated. Not a trick, not a seance, I don't want money. 3 seconds. I only need 1 night. 2. I know where he is, ma'am. I seen him, but something's keeping him. I can fix it. Her rifle dropped. It didn't lower. It dropped, just slipped from her grip and thudded into the porch like she'd forgotten how to hold it. Say that again, she whispered. The boy's eyes met hers, pale gray, unsettling even in the dimming sun. I seen your husband. He's waiting. He just can't get back. The words hit like a stone to the chest. Grace stumbled back a step, her knees weak, her throat dry. She hadn't told a soul what she'd seen that night. Not the doctor, not the preacher, not even the sheriff. She de-buried Emmett herself, and she'd done it quick. Too quick, folks had whispered. Didn't want nobody seeing the body, or the fact that there hadn't really been one. Just a jacket, his hat, and the ring she'd found clenched in something's teeth. Grace swore she saw him afterward, a glimpse behind the barn, a shadow in the corner of the room when the wind howled too loud. She'd woken up once to the scent of his tobacco pipe, fresh and burning, but by the time she rose, the air was empty again. She thought she was going mad. Now this boy. What's your name? She asked, voice raw. Call me Finch. Finch what? He shrugged. Just Finch. Grace should have slammed the door, should have sent him back the way he came and salted the path behind him, but instead she stood aside. You get 1 night, she said. 1. Finch nodded once, then stepped up onto the porch like he'd always belonged there. He smelled of dust and juniper, not sweat, not fear. She led him inside. The house was quiet, always was. Grace hadn't touched a thing since Emmett died. His coat still hung by the door, his boots waited by the hearth. She couldn't bring herself to move them. You hungry? She asked out of habit. No, ma'am. She nodded, unsure whether to be relieved or worried. Finch moved through the house like he'd seen it before. His eyes lingered on the hallway, on the cellar door, on the mantel with the wedding photo, Emmett in his gray Sunday suit, Grace in her mother's dress, too pale, too young, too in love. He stopped in front of it. This was him, he asked. Grace didn't answer, he already knew. Finch turned away and set his small bag on the floor, a single threadbare roll tied with twine. I'll need quiet, no one else in the room when I call. You said you'd bring him back, not summon his ghost. I will. She narrowed her eyes. What does that mean? It means if I do this right, he walks through that door. Silence fell like ash. Outside, the sun had vanished. Storm clouds rolled in fast, faster than they should have. Finch knelt by the hearth and began to unpack. Not bones, not blood, not crucifixes or candles, just 3 smooth stones, a coil of copper wire, and a compass that spun counterclockwise. Grace watched every motion. Her hands trembled, but she didn't stop him. "Where did you learn this?" she asked. He looked up, expression unreadable. "From the same place your husband vanished into." Before she could press him further, the compass began to rattle. The wire lifted off the floor, floating slightly like it was caught in a breeze that didn't exist. The stones pulsed faintly with warmth. "Is this witchcraft?" she asked, more curious than afraid. "No," Finch replied. "Witchcraft needs belief. This doesn't care if you believe or not." The hearth flared. Grace flinched. The fire hadn't been lit in days. She stepped forward, but Finch held up a hand. "Not yet. He's close, but not whole. Something's holding part of him back." "What?" "Something old, something wrong." Finch pulled a final object from his bag, a pocket watch, cracked and unmoving. This was his. Grace's breath caught. She hadn't seen it in weeks, thought it lost. She didn't ask how the boy had gotten it. He placed the watch between the stones. The fire pulsed again. From the cellar came a knock. Grace went still, so did Finch. It came again, slow, deliberate echoing. She grabbed the rifle without thinking. "You said he'd come through the door." Finch rose slowly. "Sometimes they forget how." He stepped toward the cellar. "No," Grace said, "I'll go." The boy didn't stop her. She opened the cellar door. It was pitch black below, the kind of dark that swallowed thought. She took one step, then another, each creak of the stair louder than the last. And then she saw him. Emmett, standing at the base of the steps, head bowed, hair matted, hands clenched. "Eliza," he whispered. She dropped the rifle. Because it wasn't her name. It never had been, not to him. And that's when she realized this was Emmett. Not anymore. She couldn't breathe. Not because of the cellar air, thick and heavy as soil after a flood, but because the thing standing in the dark knew her name and didn't use it. Eliza, not Grace. Not even Gracie, the nickname Emmett alone had the right to whisper. "Eliza?" the thing asked again, voice scraping at the walls like claws behind wallpaper. It tilted its head slowly. The motion wasn't wrong exactly. It was worse. Close enough to human to trick the eye, but twisted at the root. Like watching a reflection mimic you just a second too late. Grace's hands trembled. Her knuckles grazed the stair rail. She backed up, one boot catching on a loose plank. A breath hitched in her throat. The thing raised its head. That's when she saw its face. It wore Emmett's features like a well-fitted mask. Same strong jaw, same storm gray eyes, the faint scar above his brow from when a mule kicked him in '83. But something lived behind that face now. Something still, glassy, and impossibly patient. Like it wasn't looking at her but through her, down to the marrow. Grace stumbled up the steps, crashing back through the cellar door and slamming it shut. Her shoulder hit the wall. She reached for the rifle, useless but comforting, and pointed it at the wood as if the threat might forget how hinges worked. Finch stood by the fire, unmoved. "You said it'd be him," she snapped. "I said I could bring him back. I didn't say what else might come with him." The fire cracked once, loud and sharp. The stones around the compass had gone dark. "You're just a child," she whispered. "What do you know about any of this?" Finch looked older then. Not in face, not in stature, but in gaze. He turned toward her slowly, and when he spoke, the timbre of his voice was steady as stone. "I was born in a plague town, only survivor. First thing I saw was my mother's face, bloated and still. Second thing was something else, something waiting in her eyes that wasn't her. I learned early what death leaves behind. Grace swallowed hard. The heat of the fire offered no comfort. That thing down there, it ain't him. No, Finch agreed, not yet. She wanted to scream at him, shake him, make him explain in words she could understand, but her body wouldn't obey. Her heart galloped in her chest like a horse thrown into a thunderstorm. Her husband's voice still echoed up the stairs, that single wrong name wrapping around her like barbed wire. "What's keeping him?" she asked finally, her voice hoarse. Finch turned back toward the cellar door. "Regret," he said simply. The word hit her harder than she expected. The knock came again. Not timid this time. Louder. Heavier. Like Emmett, or what wore him, was growing stronger the longer it lingered. "We need to finish the ritual," Finch said, pulling a small knife from his coat. It gleamed in the firelight. "There's something that still ties him here, something that's not letting him cross." Grace's breath came fast now. "And you think this knife is going to solve it?" "Not the knife." He looked up at her, "the truth." She stared at him, eyes wide. "I don't understand." "You lied to him," Finch said softly, "didn't you?" The words cut deeper than any blade. The fire dimmed. Grace turned away, fists clenched, eyes burning. It had been an accident. That's what she told herself. That's what she told everyone. The letter had come from town while Emmett was out on a supply run. She never meant to open it, but the seal was already loose, and curiosity had a way of gnawing. Inside was a name she recognized too well. Samuel, her sister's boy. Her sister who died in childbirth and left Grace with that terrible choice. Send the boy to the orphanage, or raise him herself while scraping out a living from dust and disappointment. She chose silence. She let the church take him. And Emmett never knew. Never knew his last living kin had been given away like a stray dog. She burned the letter before he came home. "Tell him," Finch said. "He's dead," she spat. "No, he's not all the way, but he will be if you don't." The cellar door creaked. No one touched it. Grace stood frozen. She hadn't spoken that boy's name in over a decade. And now, with the storm rising again outside and something not quite her husband scratching at the cellar door, she felt every ounce of her choice pressing down. She stepped forward. Finch didn't stop her this time. The door opened easier than it should have. The stairs were lit now by something below, faint blue like moonlight beneath water. The thing was still standing there, still wearing his face. "Emmett," she whispered. It raised its head. "Is it you?" The silence dragged, and then slowly it nodded. "Why'd you leave me?" it asked, the voice more Emmett than it had been before. Grace stepped down, one hand gripping the railing. "I didn't," she said. Another step. "But I did lie to you." The thing didn't speak. "I never told you about Samuel, your nephew." The light pulsed once. "I got scared. I thought we couldn't raise him. I thought I couldn't. I let the sisters take him and I never looked back." The air thickened. She felt something move beneath her skin, like memory, like guilt. "I am so sorry, Emmett." The thing blinked. Then for the first time it stepped forward. No jerking, no unnatural twitches. And as it climbed the stairs, its face softened. Grace didn't move. It stopped in front of her, eyes boring into hers. "I waited," it said. "I know. I looked everywhere for you." "I know," she said again, tears slipping down her cheeks. Behind her, Finch was at the top of the stairs, watching, waiting. The boy nodded once. "Take his hand." She reached out. Fingers brushed. And the world split. A scream tore through the house, not hers, not Emmett's, but something older. From the walls, from the floorboards, from the nails in the timber. It howled with the rage of things undone. The fire died. The cellar vanished. And Grace was left alone in the kitchen. Finch lay slumped by the hearth, eyes shut. And Emmett was gone. Not just vanished, gone. The photo on the mantel was different now. It was still her and Emmett. But the man beside her was older, his eyes softer, the scar above his brow was missing. She staggered to her feet. "Finch," she called. The boy didn't stir. She crossed the room and shook him gently. He gasped awake. "It worked," he whispered. "You said he'd come back." "He did." "Where is he?" Finch sat up, blinking. "You let go, he moved on, that's what he needed." "No," she said, "you said." "I said he couldn't get back, not on his own. You opened the door, but he didn't want to stay." Tears filled her eyes. The door creaked. She spun. There, standing in the frame, was a man. Not Emmett, not quite. But not a stranger either. He stepped inside, eyes scanning the room like he remembered it from a dream. "Grace." She couldn't speak. "Where's Finch?" he asked. She turned back. But the boy was gone. Only a single feather lay where he'd been. Soft gray, still warm. Grace didn't know how long she stood there just breathing, or trying to. The man in the doorway didn't move. Neither did she. The fire had gone out, but the air felt thick with heat and something else, like memory clinging to the corners, like the room remembered things she didn't. He looked just like Emmett. But he was. His shoulders were straighter, his eyes less storm than sea, calmer somehow. He had Emmett's mouth, but the way it twitched when he said her name, soft, hopeful, almost surprised, wasn't quite right. It wasn't wrong either. That was the part that undid her most. It was all just enough. She finally moved. One step, then another. Her boots scuffed against the floorboards. She crossed the kitchen like someone walking through someone else's dream. When she reached him, she didn't touch him. Not yet. "Emmett?" she asked. The man blinked. "I think so," he said. "Some part of me is." She didn't know how to answer that. Her throat was too tight to let much out anyway. "You know me?" she finally asked. "I remember. You made bread on Sundays, even when we didn't have sugar. You'd hum same as your mother did, except you didn't know you were doing it. I remember your hands, always cold in the morning, always warm at night." She closed her eyes. The words shouldn't have meant anything. Anyone could guess that. But it was the way he said them, carefully, like they were sacred, like he'd carried them too far to risk dropping any. She reached out, her fingers brushed his chest, warm, solid, alive. "You're real." He nodded slowly. "But you're not all Emmett." "No." A silence fell between them that felt less like a pause and more like a wound. She didn't know what to ask next. She didn't know if she should. "Where is he, the boy?" The man's eyes flicked toward the empty hearth. "He's not a boy," he said softly. "Not really." Grace looked down at the single feather still lying there. It hadn't cooled. "I don't understand." "He gave up something to make this happen, something he can't get back." Her stomach turned. She crouched down, picked up the feather. It was strange in her palm, light but not weightless, soft but not quite right, like it remembered being part of something much bigger. "He said he didn't want anything." "Doesn't mean there wasn't a cost." She stood slowly. The room felt colder now, not from wind or draft, but from something deeper, something missing. The kind of cold that follows after a storm when everything has been stripped bare. "What are you?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The man tilted his head. "I'm what he made me." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got." Grace moved toward the kitchen table and sat down, the feather still in her hand. She ran her thumb over it again and again, like she could wear meaning into it. The man didn't sit. He stood near the door, as if unsure whether to cross any deeper into the house. "I buried my husband," she said finally. I thought I did." "You buried a coat, a ring, a promise." She looked up sharply. "You remember that?" "Bits and pieces. Some of it's mine, some of it's borrowed." "Borrowed from who?" He didn't answer. She rose slowly, walked past him and opened the front door. The wheat swayed softly under a sky grayer than it should have been. She stepped onto the porch, the feather still in her palm. The man followed her out. The wind caught the edge of the feather, and she tightened her grip before it could fly away. "I thought I was losing my mind," she said. "I think you were." She almost laughed. "Thanks." "You're not now." She turned to face him. "Then what now? You just stay, move in, we start over." He looked pained. "I'm not him, Grace. Not the way you remember. I don't have his laugh. I don't snore. I don't like cornbread." She stared at him. "That last part's not true." "It is," he said solemnly. "I tried it while you were asleep, hated it." A silence passed, lighter this time, but it only lasted a moment before the weight came back. "You said the boy gave something up," she said. "What?" The man looked toward the wheat fields. "His chance." "Chance for what?" "For peace, for rest, whatever waits after." Her chest tightened. "Why would he do that?" "For you." "I didn't even know him." "You do now." The sky rumbled, not thunder, something deeper, like the land itself remembering a debt. Grace stepped down off the porch. Her boots sank slightly in the damp soil. She looked across the field to where the barn stood, half leaning, half rotted, but still upright. She hadn't been inside since the day Emmett died. Since the day the wind came too fast and the clouds rolled in too sharp, and she found his hat snagged on a fence post but no sign of him anywhere. She walked toward it. The man followed. Inside it was exactly as she left it, tools rusting in their places, rope coiled but frayed, a saddle that hadn't been oiled in months. The dust was thick but the air was still. Then she saw it. A mark on the far wall, new, sharp. A feather carved deep. She reached out to touch it. And her mind filled with sound. Voices, whispers, screams, laughter. None of it hers, none of it his. All of it Finch, yes. She staggered back. "What is this?" "He left part of himself here," the man said, "to make me. I didn't ask for this." "You didn't have to." Grace stepped back out into the open air. The wind had picked up again. The clouds churned above them. "I want to find him," she said. "You can't." "I have to." "He's gone." "No," she said. "He gave up everything for me, for you. I won't let that be the end of him." The man's eyes flickered. "If you go looking, you won't like what you find." "Then help me." He hesitated. "Please." He closed his eyes, took a breath. When he opened them again, something had changed. A layer had peeled back, and for just a moment she saw it, the truth under his skin. Not just Emmett, not just Finch, something stranger, something older, but kind. "I remember a place," he said, "where he went after he left here." "Where?" He looked east. "Red Hollow." Her stomach dropped. No one went to Red Hollow. Not after what happened last winter, not after the fire, not after the things that walked out when the fire went out. "You sure?" "I'm not sure about anything, but that's where the trail goes." She nodded. "Then that's where we go." The man looked at her, surprised. "You're not afraid?" "I've been afraid," she said. "Didn't change anything. I buried a man, loved a ghost, and fed a stranger cornbread. Fear's not the strangest thing I've done." He gave her a look. "You're sure?" She didn't answer with words. She walked back inside, grabbed her coat, strapped on her boots, took the rifle, too, not out of hope but out of habit, slid the feather into her pocket. When she stepped back outside, the man was still there, waiting. And above them, far off, the clouds began to spiral. The road to Red Hollow hadn't been used since the winter the earth gave up and swallowed half the county in fire and ash. Grace remembered the smoke that drifted west for weeks after, curling over the hills like fingers still searching for what they'd missed. She remembered the headlines, too, back when the town still had papers to print them. Whole town lost. Some say not to fire. Some say to something else. Now only the dust traveled that way. But Grace Carroll did too. She rode at dawn. The man didn't ask where they were headed again. After she told him Red Hollow, he simply packed a small bag, lifted himself onto the old mule that had survived everything except a proper name, and followed without protest. He didn't talk much, and she didn't ask much. Some things didn't need questions. Some journeys just needed silence. By noon, the fields behind them were little more than a pale ribbon in the distance. And the land ahead began to change. Gone was the golden wheat. Gone were the soft hills and scattered fences. Here the trees leaned too far, their trunks curved like they'd been listening to something they couldn't unhear. The soil turned darker, thick with iron and root. Even the birds stopped calling, as if warning went only so far. Grace adjusted the rifle on her back. "You remember this place?" she asked the man riding beside her. He stared ahead. "I remember Finch remembering it." "That mean anything?" He shrugged. Means we're close to something, just not sure what. That wasn't comforting. But then again, none of this had been. They reached the edge of Red Hollow as the sun dipped low, though it never truly set out here. Not over the hollow. Instead, it seemed to stall halfway down the sky, caught between evening and night like it didn't know which it owed more to. Shadows stretched in the wrong direction. Grace saw the old signpost half buried in vine and thyme. Redhollow. Est 1843, closed for good. Closed for good, she read aloud. Hell does that mean? It means someone tried to keep something in. The man dismounted first. His boots landed soft in the dead grass. Grace followed, the rifle slung loose over her shoulder. The town ahead was mostly ruins now, charred bones of buildings, broken spines of homes, but there was something underneath. She could feel it, like walking on glass and knowing it used to be a mirror. They passed the shell of a church first, just 4 blackened beams and a bell that no longer rang. "This is where it started," he murmured. She looked at him sharply. "Finch." He nodded faintly. "Not him, not exactly, but this is where he changed." They walked further in. The houses here were sunk into the earth like teeth, slumped forward as if apologizing. The sky above them rippled like heat, though the air was cold. Too cold. Grace wrapped her coat tighter around her and quickened her pace. They reached the square just as the light turned blue. Not night. Not day. Just blue. And at the center of the square stood a single child. Grace stopped. It was Finch. But not. His back was to them, same coat, same hat, same shape, but the air around him shimmered. His hands were out at his sides, palms open to the wind. He stood in the middle of what remained of the well, old stones cracked, the bucket long gone. The man beside her took a single step forward. Grace grabbed his arm. "You said he gave up everything." "He did." "Then how is he here?" "I don't know." She let go, stepped forward. "Finch," she called softly. The boy turned. It was him. But younger. Or older. Or maybe neither. His eyes weren't gray anymore. They were glass. "Grace," he said, like he'd been expecting her for years. She walked slowly across the broken square. "You're alive." He smiled faintly, In a way. You left. I had to. You didn't say goodbye. I wasn't supposed to. She reached the well, stopped a few feet away. He hadn't moved since turning. You gave up your place, your chance at whatever waits. I wasn't going to let you go through it alone. She swallowed hard. You don't even know me. I know enough. Silence then. Why here? She asked. Finch's smile faded. Because this is where I ended. Her throat tightened. This is where the first Finch was buried. Not me, the first version. The real boy. They say he died in the fire, but something else came out. Something wearing his name. That's me. She shook her head slowly. I don't. I've had 100 lives, Grace. Some long, some short, but they all end here, back in Red Hollow, back where it started. She stepped closer. What do you want from me? Finch looked past her, toward the man who wasn't quite Emmett. I need you both to remember. Remember what? Who I was before this, before the rituals, before the bargains. His voice cracked. I was just a boy. Grace moved then without knowing why. She reached out and took his hands, cold, like holding water that didn't move. I remember, she said. Finch trembled. That's enough, he whispered. The world pulsed. Not visibly, not in light or sound. But inside. Like something deep and buried had shifted. The man behind her stepped to the edge of the well. He looked at Finch, then at Grace. You gave up your place, he said softly. Finch nodded. But now, Grace added, you have another. She held tighter. Stay. Finch's face twisted, not in fear, not in pain, but in hope. Fragile, sharp-edged hope. Do you mean that? I do. The sky cracked. Lightning without light. A sound like glass shattering underwater. And then the square was empty. The well was gone. The ruins around them gone too. They stood in a field now. Green, quiet hole. A house stood in the distance. Familiar. Grace blinked. That's my house. The man beside her nodded. And that's your porch, he said. They stood side by side, staring at it. The field that should have been fallow was full, crops growing strong. The air smelled of rain and bread and sun. And on the porch, a boy. Older now. 16, maybe 17. Same gray eyes, same steady hands. He waved. Is this real? Grace whispered. I think so, the man replied. Grace turned to him. Who are you now? He smiled faintly. Who you need me to be. She stared at him. I don't want ghosts anymore. I'm not a ghost. Then what are you? I'm your memory, your guilt, your love, your need. She stepped back. I need truth. He nodded. Then that's what I'll be. She turned toward the house. Her boots brushed wildflowers. The man followed. And behind them, for the first time in decades, Red Hollow slept. Grace Carroll had stood on her own porch more times than she could count. She leaned on that banister while the sky churned with thunder, pulled boots off muddy children beneath that roofline, clutched letters in that doorway with trembling hands and read words she could never unread. But this version of her porch, her home, was something else entirely. The wood wasn't splintered or worn. The nails didn't creak in the wind. Even the windows shone with a clarity that felt wrong, not because they weren't beautiful, but because beauty hadn't belonged here in a long time. And on that perfect porch, the boy waited. He sat on the steps, elbows on knees, chin resting in one palm like he'd only just finished a chore and was waiting for supper to be called. His coat was newer now. His boots weren't torn, but it was the eyes that got her, the same storm gray shade Emmett had once carried, the same knowing calm she'd seen in Finch the moment she met him. Grace stopped a few yards from the porch. Her chest rose and fell in a tight rhythm. The man beside her didn't speak. He hadn't said a word since they crossed the boundary out of Red Hollow, if you could call it a boundary. One step, and the world had shifted, not like walking into a memory, more like walking into a mercy she didn't believe she'd earned. The boy looked up and grinned. "You made it." Grace's voice caught. "Finch." He stood and dusted off his palms. "Not anymore, least not the way I was." "You're older." He shrugged. "Time moves different here. Some places age you by the day, some by the weight of what you carry." She looked him over. "I buried you," she said, voice low. "You buried a boy who never got to live, but I'm not that boy, not anymore. I'm what came after." The man beside her finally spoke. "So this is where you went." The boy looked at him. "Didn't have much of a choice. You took my name." "I didn't take it," the man said. "You gave it." "Well," the boy said softly, "now I'm asking for it back." A stillness settled. Grace turned to the man whose face, though still calm, had paled. "What does that mean?" He looked at her. "It means I'm not meant to stay." "No." Her voice came out sharp, desperate. Her hand went to the man's arm instinctively. "You brought him back. You helped me. We're not finished." But the man was already changing. Not visibly, not yet, but she could feel the unthreading in him. Like the seams of who he was had started to fray, and the weight of the name he'd borrowed no longer fit. He turned to Grace, eyes full of something quiet and old and terribly kind. "I wasn't meant to last," he said. "I was the bridge, that's all. You walked it. Now you're here." She took a shaky step back. "But I don't want to lose you." "You never had me," he said gently. "You just remembered something you needed. I wore his face, but it was never mine." The boy stepped forward, his gaze soft. "I'll carry the rest," he told the man. "You can let go." The man nodded once. Then slowly he smiled. It was the same smile Emmett gave her once, after fixing the fence during a storm, soaked to the bone but proud of the work. A smile that said this was worth it, even if it hurt. The man turned to Grace. "You gave up everything to hold onto something. Now you've found something better." She wanted to stop him, wanted to reach out, but something in her knew not to. And then, with no ceremony at all, he was gone. Not vanished, just no longer needed. The wind shifted. The boy turned to her. "Come inside," he said. "It's safer there." She followed. The house was just as perfect inside. The floors didn't groan. The kitchen smelled faintly of clove and lemon. The table was set for 3, though she hadn't seen anyone else. Everything felt ready, like it had been waiting not for someone but for her. She sat at the table. The boy poured tea into mismatched mugs. When he sat, he watched her with the same unreadable stillness Finch always had, but now it was gentler, lighter. "Where are we?" she asked. "Somewhere between." "Between what?" "Endings." She stared into her tea. "I don't understand." "You will." Silence stretched. Outside, birds chirped faintly, too faint, like they weren't really outside at all but remembered into being. "Are we dead?" The boy smiled. "Would it matter if we were?" Grace didn't answer. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. "You lost something," he said. "More than just Emmett, more than just a boy in the snow." Her eyes burned. "You gave away pieces of yourself to survive," he said. "Now I want to give some back." "How?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he rose from the table and walked toward the hallway. "Follow me." She did. The hallway was longer than it should have been. Each door they passed whispered names she didn't say aloud, Samuel, Nora, Rose, June. People she'd known. People she hadn't. Faces that flickered behind her eyes before fading. He stopped at the last door. "This one's yours." He pushed it open. Grace stepped inside. The room wasn't a bedroom. It wasn't a parlor or a pantry or a cellar. It was every memory she'd ever tried to bury. They hung in the air like lanterns, suspended moments frozen in flickering amber light. She saw herself as a girl, pressing her face to the window when Pa didn't come back. Saw Emmett asleep in the field, hat over his eyes before the thunder rolled in. Saw herself holding a crumpled letter beside the hearth with tears staining the ink. She reached for one. Her fingers passed through it, but the warmth remained. The boy stood beside her, watching. "These are yours," he said. "You can take them or leave them, it's up to you." She swallowed hard. "I thought I'd already dealt with all this. Surviving isn't the same as healing." Her shoulders shook. She turned slowly, took one more look at the memories before stepping back into the hall. "I want to go home," she whispered. "You are home. Number home. The boy's eyes darkened slightly. "You can't go back the way you came." "Then show me another way." He watched her for a long moment. Then he nodded. And the house began to fade. It didn't vanish, didn't burn or crumble. It just receded like a tide going out, leaving behind only what belonged. She stood in a field again. Morning, dew on the grass, the sound of the wind soft and distant. The boy stood beside her. He was younger now. Same coat, same boots, but his eyes were a child's eyes again. "Don't forget me," he said. "I couldn't if I tried." She bent, kissed his forehead. When she stood again, he was gone. And for the first time since Emmett died, Grace Carroll felt light. Not because she'd been healed. Not because everything made sense. But because she'd stopped running from what hurt. She turned toward the east. The sun was rising. Somewhere behind her, Red Hollow slept. Somewhere ahead, the world waited. And she was ready to meet it. The ground beneath Grace Carrow's boots was no longer soft with memory. It was real dirt again, dry, cracked in places, with scraggly grass coming up stubbornly between the seams. She felt the air as it was meant to be, cool and uncertain, no longer soaked in dreams. There was no longer a house behind her. No porch, no man who wore her husband's face, no boy with storm-colored eyes who offered to bring him back. Just a sky that looked honest again, a path that led west or maybe east. It didn't much matter. What mattered was that she walked it alone now, and for the first time since the boy arrived, that didn't scare her. It had been a day since she'd left whatever world had held her in that strange in-between. She hadn't eaten, hadn't slept either. Her body should have cried out for rest, but instead it just kept going, like grief had finally burned off and left something stronger in its place. She came to a town just before sunset. One of those nearly dead places that tried to be more than a dot on the map but never quite made it. Most buildings were boarded, windows shut like eyes that didn't want to see anymore. A saloon stood crookedly at the corner of the main strip, and just past it, a small chapel leaned westward, the cross on its steeple dangling by a single iron nail. Grace stopped at the watering trough beside the stable and let her reflection settle. She looked older, not just tired, older, like she'd lived more than she should have in too little time. Her hands trembled when she reached down to splash water on her face, but the cold steadied her. Behind her, a door creaked. She didn't flinch. "Ma'am." The voice was young, not the boy, not Finch, but someone else, new. She turned slowly. A girl, maybe 15, stood in the saloon doorway. Freckles like mud splatter, a dress 2 sizes too big cinched at the waist with rope. She looked at Grace the way a pup might look at a wolf, curious, cautious, but not afraid. "You look like you've seen something," the girl said. "I have." "Did it look back?" Grace stared at her. Yes. The girl nodded like that was a fair answer. You hungry? I'm not sure. Well, if you change your mind, Cook's got beans and not much else. Grace stepped up onto the warped boardwalk. The saloon inside was quiet, not dead, just waiting. Two men sat at a table near the back, playing cards in silence. A woman with silver braids behind the bar polished a glass that didn't need polishing. When she saw Grace, she didn't smile, but her gaze softened. You come from Hollow direction? The woman asked. Grace nodded. The whole room seemed to stiffen. Didn't think anyone came back from there. I didn't think I would either. The girl who'd met her outside pulled out a chair. Sit, you look like you need it. Grace sat. The beans were bland and barely warm, but she ate them anyway. Her hands shook worse now that she wasn't walking, like motion had been the only thing keeping the tremble out. The older woman came over after a while. You looking for something? She asked. Not anymore. You running from something? Not anymore. Then why keep moving? Grace looked down at her hands. Because he gave me a second chance, and I don't know what to do with it. The woman sat across from her. Who? Grace hesitated. A boy, small, wore a coat too big for his shoulders, said he could bring my husband back. One of the men at the card table turned his head slightly. The other one set down his hand slow. The girl leaned in. He had gray eyes. Grace nodded. Was his name Finch? The girl whispered. Grace's breath caught. Yes. The woman behind the bar exhaled softly. Well, I'll be. You know him. We know of him, the girl said. Not many don't. He came through here? Grace asked. The woman shook her head. Not this place, but close enough. They say he don't walk like other folks, more like the land makes room for him. Grace clutched the edge of the table. I thought he was gone. I thought he. Boys like that don't stay gone, the woman said. Not while there's still sorrow to mend. Grace pushed back her chair. I need to find him. You sure? No, she whispered, but I need to try. The girl stood, tugging a map from the wall. Here, she said, laying it flat. They say he was seen near Whitlock Ridge. That was last week. Grace studied the lines. That's a 3-day ride. The girl shrugged. Longer if you've got questions. Grace traced her finger toward the ridge. He wouldn't go back, not after what he gave. Maybe he didn't have a choice, the woman said. Or maybe you're the one who doesn't. That night Grace slept in the stable loft. The hay was prickly and the wind howled through the boards like a warning, but she dreamed of the boy again, not as Finch, not as the child who stood in her kitchen asking for nothing. This time he was older, taller, eyes still gray but ringed with light. He didn't speak. He just pointed west. When she woke, the sky was still dark. She left before the town stirred, taking the old mare from the stable and slipping a few coins under the saddle post. By the time the sun broke the horizon, Grace Caro was already a ghost to the town behind her. 3 days later, she reached Whitlock Ridge. It wasn't much, a single ridge running sharp along the high plain with a scattering of dead pines clinging to its spine. There were signs of others, ashes from old fires, broken prints half faded in the soil, but no boy, no answers. She camped that night beneath a split boulder. The stars burned bright, unblinking. She held the feather still tucked in her coat pocket. And then, just before sleep took her, a voice. I didn't think you'd come. She turned sharply. There he was. Finch. Not older, not younger, just him. She rose slowly. I thought you were done. I was. You said goodbye. I did. She stepped closer. He looked the same, but the world didn't shimmer now. No haze, no dream edges, just two people standing in dust and dark. "I need to know something," she said. He nodded. "Did I ask too much?" His expression didn't change. "No." "Then why did you leave?" "Because you were strong enough to stay." She blinked. Tears burned behind her eyes. "I was." "You were." She shook her head. "I felt like I'd break in half." "And if you had?" he asked. She looked down. "I don't know." "But you didn't." She closed the distance between them. "You gave me something I didn't know I needed." "You gave it back." "I want to help you," she said. "Whatever's chasing you, whatever's coming, I want to face it with you." He smiled faintly. "It's not me they're coming for," he said. Her stomach turned. "What do you mean?" "You opened the door, Grace." The wind picked up. He stepped back just once. "You remembered me. That means others will too." Her pulse quickened. "Who?" But he was gone. Not vanished, taken. Yanked backward by something in the shadows behind the ridge. She screamed his name and ran, but the darkness swallowed his shape like ink. The feather in her coat turned hot against her chest. And somewhere far ahead, a new voice rose. Not Finch. Not Emmett. Something else. Something that remembered everything. The scream that tore from Grace Caro's throat didn't echo. It didn't bounce back from the ridge or ripple through the trees. It just vanished, devoured by whatever force had swallowed the boy. 1 second Finch stood in front of her, eyes full of something like peace, and the next he was gone, dragged backward into that heavy, unnatural dark like a thread pulled too tight. She stood frozen, every part of her body begging to bolt, except her heart, which remained rooted to the spot where he'd stood. The air around the ridge felt wrong now. Not cold, not hot, just void, like even time had paused, afraid to take another step. Then came the whisper. It didn't come from behind or above. It came from inside, as if something had crawled into her bones and decided to speak in her own blood. You opened the door. She turned in a slow circle, rifle drawn, though instinct told her no steel would matter here. You remembered the wrong boy. No, she breathed. I remembered the only one who ever mattered. The ridge behind her groaned, a noise not made of rock or wind but memory, twisted and stretched until it broke. And from the mouth of the dark came a shape, not a man, not a beast, but a tangle of what had been. Limbs bent in ways they shouldn't, faces that flickered and changed, none lasting more than a breath. But she recognized the voice when it spoke again. He wasn't meant to leave. It was Emmett's voice. And Finch, yes. And 100 others layered over top, like a choir of grief. Grace didn't move. She couldn't, not out of fear but out of defiance. I don't care what he was meant to do, she said. He chose, that means something. The thing in the dark paused. Then came a low sound, not quite laughter, more like a sigh from the earth itself. Joyce has a cost. And with that the shape lunged. Grace fired. The bullet didn't hit, didn't miss either. It simply vanished as it crossed into that unnatural shadow like it had never been. She ran. Not away, but into it. She didn't know why. Didn't plan to. Her boots hit gravel, then dirt, then something else, soft, wet, like stepping into a river of ink. Her body tried to scream that this was wrong, but her soul knew better. She had to reach him, had to find him again. And then, she was falling. Not down. Through. Through memory, through time, through every version of herself she'd ever tried to forget. She saw the barn where Emmett died. Saw herself kneeling beside his body, hands shaking, not from fear but from rage. Saw the way the sun had dared to rise the next morning, as if the world hadn't ended. Then she saw Finch again, but not as a boy. He was a baby now, swaddled in ash and crying in the arms of a woman she didn't recognize. Dark hair, cracked lips, eyes like storm clouds. The woman was whispering something to the child in a language Grace didn't know but understood. And then she handed the baby into the hands of something else, something cloaked in light and shadow, neither of which stayed in place for long. Then gone. More flashes. Finch as a child, standing at the edge of a river that moved backward. Finch as a teenager, burying a knife in the dirt with tears in his eyes. Finch as a man, eyes hollow, holding the hand of someone dying. Maybe Grace, maybe not. And then, darkness. She landed hard. Not on earth. Not on stone. Just somewhere. She gasped, coughing up black water her coat soaked through. Her rifle was gone. But the feather, the one Finch had left, was still in her pocket. Still warm. She held it to her chest and stood. All around her stretched a place not built for people. The sky was stitched in jagged lines of red and silver, and the ground pulsed like breath beneath her boots. Shapes moved at the edge of sight, but none dared approach. Not yet. Then she saw him. Finch. Kneeling beside what looked like a pool, not of water but of light. His face was drawn, pale. His hands were pressed to the edge like he was holding something inside it down. She ran. He looked up, startled. You shouldn't be here. I had to come. It's waking up, Grace. I don't know if I can stop it this time. She reached him and dropped to her knees. What is it? He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at her with something like shame. This is the part of me I never wanted you to see. She looked down into the light. And she understood. It wasn't a monster. Not exactly. It was him. The parts of him he'd given away again and again, memories too painful, love too dangerous, choices that didn't belong to boys with no one to guide them. They were all here, and they were angry. You've been holding this alone, she whispered. I didn't know how else to live. She reached out, took one of his hands, then the other. Together they gripped the edge of the pool. And pulled. It screamed. Not a sound, not a voice, just feeling like guilt given form, like sorrow weaponized. And it tried to become her. Tried to pour itself into her skin, her veins, her eyes. But she held firm. Because she knew this kind of pain. She had carried it, buried it, and walked on anyway. So when it tried to show her everything she had lost, Emmett, the baby that hadn't made it, the years of silence, she showed it back. The porch light flicking on when Emmett came home late, grinning like he hadn't just worried her half to death. The way the baby had once kicked, just strong enough to make her laugh through the tears. The boy in the snow who said he could bring someone back, and did. It hissed. It cracked. And then, it broke. The pool turned black. Then still. Then gone. And they were just two people kneeling on strange ground, the silence around them no longer cruel. Finch collapsed against her. I didn't think I could be whole again. Grace held him. You were never broken, just tired. He let out a shaky breath. I think we can go now. She nodded. And this time he led her. Out of the dark. Back to the ridge. Back to the stars. Back to a world that still needed mending. And when they reached the edge, the first real breeze found them, soft, new. Where now? Finch asked. Grace smiled, though it trembled. We go home. He looked at her, eyes full of stormlight. You mean it? I do. And behind them, the place that had tried to keep him, the weight of all he had been and could never be again, sealed itself shut with no sound, no cry. Only stillness. because even pain, once named, can rest.